Hey everybody, welcome to Mecha Dragon. I'm Will, and this is Bob. And today we are talking about the third episode of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, titled Power Broker. Now, for those of you listening to the show as an audio podcast, we have recently undergone an evolution. I would urge you to check us out on YouTube, which has become our primary platform. And if you're watching here on YouTube and you enjoy this video, please click like and subscribe. Now, with that housekeeping out of the way, let's get to the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So, Bob, I thought we could start. Again, everybody, these are... there's going to be many spoilers in this episode. We're not bothering with a non-spoiler section. So, with that in mind, let's continue. So, Bob, could I start with just getting your, general impressions of this episode and just, what you thought about it and how you felt about it?
Well, in this episode, we see John Walker sort of reveal a little bit more of himself.
A bit.
And we meet an old familiar face, a couple of them actually, that join in. We have Sharon Walker. No, not Sharon Walker. Why did I even say that?
No!
Sharon Carter.
No! Yeah, Sharon Carter.
Sharon Carter. Like, I don't know where that came from. Anyway, Sharon Carter shows up to, save the fellas. Because, they got in trouble again. And there wasn't as much action in this one as there is in some. Even with all the troubles they have.
There was some action, but it wasn't to the level of like the aerial fight that they opened with, or the one.
Yeah, it was more subdued. It was one or two shots. Our biggest action scene was the big explosion scene. So I mean that was a little bit surprising for being halfway and to tone down the violence in the middle. Usually it sort of builds over time instead of taking a big dip. But you get a lot of story. And as the episode is called Power Broker, you get a little breadcrumbs about the Power Broker, but not a lot directly about the Power Broker, was kind of surprising since they called the episode Power Broker.
Yeah, I think it was more like the Power Broker kind of cast a shadow over this entire episode,
Well, yeah, it's like as they're panning through on their way to that club, the Power Broker sees you on the wall.
Not creepy at all, right?
Yeah, not even a little bit.
Yeah, I thought the Power Broker references were interesting, and there were several references. I think there was that shot. Bucky mentions Power Broker when they start their like undercover mission, right? And they go into the club with Zemo, and he's like, "Everybody stay in character." And when they finally get to the bar, Bucky's like, "Wait a minute, Power Broker?" And Zemo says something like, "Yeah, this probably, we don't want to like really attract his attention, so let's stick to the, the low level peeps," basically. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, obviously.
Yeah, he says something along the lines of every kingdom needs a king. He runs that little island.
Yeah.
So let's not make him mad.
Right. And also Carly in one of her scenes mentions the Power Broker. So it was kind of casting a long shadow over the episode without us, being introduced properly to the Power Broker, like in person. Power Broker didn't show up and like directly punch someone or do something like that. But I do find it interesting, and I feel like the Power Broker is. Look, I mean, Carly and her Flag Smasher super soldier people are clearly, evolving into the show's villains, but I feel like the Power Broker has a villainous role to play as well. If Carly is Darth Vader, then Power Broker is the Emperor type of a thing. That analogy isn't quite great because she's a far cry from Darth Vader. But you have a villain that's more sort of involved in the scene to scene sort of conflict with the heroes, and then you have a sort of an uber villain who's sort of in the shadows behind it all, throughout the majority of the story. So that's kind of how that I'm looking at that. Other general impressions of the episode. What were the notable things that hit you?
One of the biggest things that hit me out of the gate was how quickly John Walker went from we're seriously on this mission to when people just don't find him all that impressive, he sort of stomps out in a huff. I mean,
I have some comments about John Walker. I love to bash on that poor son of a bee.
I mean, how much of a hero can you be if the first time somebody doesn't find you impressive, you have to stomp off in a huff? I mean, your street cred is low at that point.
True dat, right? True dat. Yeah, I have a lot of comments about John Walker, but generally speaking, yeah, I mean, I got the same sort of feeling. And it was nice to see Sharon Carter. I believe I predicted in our last episode that she would appear in this episode, because I kind of figured that, I don't know, I just, for various reasons, I thought she would have to appear by the midpoint of the story.
Right.
And there she was. For I think the first time we see her, she's just like a shadowy figure in the club who like pulls her hood down, and then she goes up and like snipes out a couple guys for them, right? To help Sam and Bucky.
That's sort of implied. I don't know if you can clearly see her. It's sort of
can't. But it's definitely her, because later when we see her, she's wearing that the same clothes.
Yeah.
And frankly, who else would it have been at that point? So
it would not be the first Marvel misdirect.
True, but if that wasn't her, I don't see a reason for it to be some random person who we don't find out who it is yet. But yeah, it was cool to see her. It was interesting to see what had become of her. I mean, I got the impression, I don't think they said directly, but I got the impression that she had not been blipped and's just been kind of trying to survive the whole time. But we'll talk about Sharon more specifically later. How was this episode for you compared to the other ones so far? Now, you mentioned wasn't quite as much action, but we did get maybe some more story beats, and there was some action, to be clear, but it just wasn't amped up to 11, basically.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't amped up as much as other ones, but they did give you a lot of story, and it was still paced very well.
Yeah,
I'd say this one for me was maybe like an 8 out of 10.
Oh, okay, 8 out of 10 for this episode compared to the other ones.
Yeah.
I don't know how to rate just this episode, because I'm kind of waiting to see how the whole sort of season comes together. But for me,
well, there's only 3 more episodes. Whatever they're getting together, they should need to. Let's get on it.
Oh yeah, I mean we're at the midpoint by the end of this episode. But they're going to be, regardless. They're going to be heading into the next phase of their investigation. Walker's just kind of banking on following them at this point, right? Now the thing is, we're going to have to talk about this more specifically in a minute, but what does that leave? That leaves the power broker out there, right? Doing whatever shady power broker things are going on. And that leaves the flag smashers, which they're going to have to find and stop, because now they are amping up what they're doing. And we're going to talk about that more specifically in a minute. So, at the midpoint, the heroes are taking a very proactive, stance and trying to solve all of this stuff, but yet it almost feels like they're farther away than they were at the beginning of last episode, right? Because they don't quite have as many leads, maybe.
One of their biggest leads just died.
Just died.
Yeah.
So there we are. So unless you have anything else general to say, I think we should move on to our main topics that we have. And
yeah, let's do it.
Okay, great. So the first topic I have is I want to talk about John Walker. Surprise, surprise. So Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Episode 3, gave us a deeper look into the character of John Walker, aka the new Star-Spangled Man. He starts the episode on the trail of Carly Morgenthau, but when his status as the new Captain America fails to impress a Flag Smasher sympathizer, Walker rage quits the investigation and opts to wait for Sam and Bucky to do his job for him. And that's literally the last we see of him this episode. Now, I think it's worth reflecting here on the contrast between him and old school Captain America, Steve Rogers. Not only has Steve proved his tenacity time and time again, but his unassuming way and sincere humility could not be more different or less obnoxious than Walker's self-importance and outburst of narcissistic rage. Where he says, "Do you know who I am?" Remember how Steve Rogers described himself when Red Skull asked, basically, why him? Why give him the super soldier serum? He said, "I'm just a kid from Brooklyn." I mean, how did this John Walker guy get to be the new Captain America anyway? Now, if you remember, of course, there was that whole media news profile of him talking about how awesome he was and showing him in action, like shooting guns and throwing the shield and all that stuff. So, oh yeah, pretty easy to see why the Pentagon, President, and Washington PR machine would pick this guy, right? He is a thrice-honored badass soldier who is so badass that MIT scientists had to study his badassery. One might even call him the perfect soldier. It's a no-brainer. Or is it? I feel like we're forgetting something. Remember when, Dr. Erskine had that talk with Steve on the bunks where he said, "This is why you were chosen, because the strong man who has known power all his life will lose respect for that power, but the weak man knows the value of strength and knows compassion." And then he says, "Whatever happens tomorrow, you must promise me one thing, that you will stay who you are, not a perfect soldier, but a good man." So somehow I doubt that the politicians in Washington, D.C. made Dr. Erskine's criteria a priority in choosing the next Captain America. And forgive me if I suspect that Walker is just this sort of man to lose respect for power. Now, no one was ever going to be able to fill Steve's shoes, and not everyone needs to be Steve. The way things are going so far, though, Walker makes me want to tear that shield away from him, grab him by the harness, and say, "You are not worthy," much like Odin did to Thor. But what do you think? Am I being too harsh on Johnny Boy? Will he turn out to be less of an a-hole than these comparisons to Steve make him out to be? Or do you feel the urge to punch him in that smug little face just as much as I do? Let us know in the comments. And Bob, same question to you. Am I being too harsh here, or are these signs from Walker truly troubling?
I think you're being kind, to be honest. Like Marvel seems to be intentionally leading us towards the conclusion that while physically he may be a good soldier, mentally he's not the guy. He's just not that guy. When you go to do an interrogation and the suspect's like, "Yeah, I know who you are, and I just don't care," and it just makes you rage quit. Just some dude on the street is like, "I don't care about you."
That's what he did.
And you go have a temper tantrum about it. You're not the guy.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's just that simple.
And he literally is like, "Okay, well, I guess we'll just wait for Sam and Bucky to do this for us."
Yeah, and then later in the episode, they kind of figure out, they can't prove it, but they kind of figure out it's Sam and Bucky who get Zemo out of jail. And they're like, "What are we going to do?" "Well, we're going to go off book." He basically says, "We're going off book, and if we get the job done, who's going to care how we did it?"
Yeah, and that's not to say that Steve never went off book, but it feels different to me, in a way. Because it just feels different. Because, Steve was motivated by, I feel, very different factors. And he was also never one to have a, narcissistic rage explosion at someone. So I just feel like Steve was more tenacious. I mean, can you imagine if Walker was the guy in the position, after the blip happened, or, the snapping, during the blip, and Ant-Man shows up and he's like, I have this wild and crazy idea to turn back time and blah, blah, blah. Is Walker really the guy who's going to like go the extra mile to like make sure that that all happens? You know, I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think he's the guy. I don't think there's any. I don't think there's any other way to look at it.
Like, do you think let me ask you this question. What do you think are the chances that later on Walker surprises us in the sense that, or at least surprises me and probably you too, in the sense that he shows that he's not that bad of a guy after all? Maybe he's got, you know, a little bit of arrogance or whatever, but ultimately, you know, when the rubber hits the road, he's going to do the right thing? Or do you think it's going to be more of, you know, if it turns out he ends up getting some kind of enhancement that he abuses it, you know, or just in any sort of way, like Dr. Erskine was kind of, you know, talking about, loses respect for the power he has and you know, doesn't operate with any compassion. What are the chances of him going either of those two ways to you?
10% chance he surprises us and turns out to be a decent human being underneath it all. That's about how much faith I have in it.
Okay. You think he's not a decent human being whatsoever? Or do you think that
he
he's just
is
sort of
more focused on his career? You mentioned how Steve would break the rules. Steve broke the rules for the greater good. This guy's breaking the rules for his own career. And that's the main difference.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so you think 10% chance?
At best. I'm being generous at 10%.
Okay. I'm going to say there's like a 20 to 25% chance. I think it's pretty low, but I think that it's like something that Marvel would do, because what I don't think that they're going to do is make it like a really black and white, like this guy's evil. It's going to be more shades of gray. It's going to be, oh, maybe he has good intentions or something like that, but ultimately he was corrupted by power type of a thing.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to be blatantly evil. I don't think he's going to turn into the next, you know, Red Skull or anything. But he's definitely not the guy that you want having that kind of power and responsibility.
He's not the guy. I mean, when he said,
"Do you know who I am?"
He lost it in that moment. He lost it, dude. That is not a man who is in full control of himself, right? And whatever you can say about Steve, he never had, you know, like an enraged outburst. Like he maybe, you know, like let himself go in a fight and like, you know, punched somebody really hard a few times or something like that. But I can't remember a moment when like Steve let his like rage and, I don't know, get the better of him and like turn into, you know, like some type of outburst like that. Is there any moment even resembling that in any of the MCU?
The closest I remember is when Steve and Tony start to argue about using the Mind Stone and creating what ultimately becomes Vision. Okay,
and so you're talking about an Age of Ultron.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I'm thinking of is when they were fighting at Hawkeye's house out and like they're like splitting wood and Tony sort of is like, you know, poking him and is like, oh, I don't trust anybody that doesn't have a dark side or whatever. And Cap just like rips the log apart with his bare hands and he's like, maybe you haven't seen it yet. That's like the closest thing I can remember. I'm not. Are you talking about when they're in like Tony's lab and they're arguing about it?
Yeah.
Like right before Thor comes back and he's like, no, Tony was right. And everybody's like, oh, didn't see that coming. And he nukes the pod that Vision is like being birthed from and like brings it out.
Yeah, you see the little meter like struggling, like almost enough power, not quite enough power, almost enough power, and then he gives it the Thor zap, and it's like 100%. Let's do it.
So you're talking about the argument like right before then,
yeah,
basically.
Like
okay.
you just kind of think, is, you know, Steve going to put Tony through that wall right there?
I think they were starting to have a heated argument, but it didn't rise to the level of like, respect my authority because I'm Captain America, you know.
Well, no, he even if he lost his temper, he wouldn't have that much narcissism in him. But
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest. If you're going to lose your temper at somebody, it's going to be Tony Stark because he can be a lot of work. I mean, he's one of my favorite MCU characters. Don't get me wrong. I love Tony,
He,
but he's a lot of work.
he's a lot of work. Yeah. He's almost like constantly like pushing your buttons on purpose to make you have an outburst so that he can get the upper hand more easily. Like not that it's hard for him to get the upper hand in a conversation with almost any given person.
Yeah,
You
but you
know?
don't do that to somebody with 5 times your strength.
Well, unless you're Tony Stark.
Don't poke the bear.
Right. So, okay, I mean, I think we're agreed on this, but like, you know, folks, if you're watching this video on YouTube or you're listening to this on, you know, on your podcast device, like, let us know what you think. Do you disagree with us about John Walker? I mean, I know he's got more of a history in the comics, and you know, he's maybe more of a dimensional character there than what we've seen so far here. I don't know, but you know, let us know what you think. So I think it's time to move on to our next topic. And I want to talk about Bucky, actually. So let's do that. Let's talk about Bucky. Not that he's led on, but I think he's having a hard time in the third episode of Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Zemo reminds him of the past and says there's still something of the Winter Soldier in his eyes. And you can see that it disturbs him in that scene. Then he's got to pretend to be a brainwashed tool of Hydra again when they go undercover. And after everything he's been doing to try and make amends, none of this can be easy, right? At one point, after Sam says he should have destroyed the shield, Bucky's frustration shines through, I think, almost as much as it has so far, and he says he's going to take the shield away from Walker first. So, Bob, how do you think Bucky is doing up to this point? Is he maintaining his calm, or is he dangerously close to the edge?
Bucky's got his own set of problems. I mean, the series starts with him going to therapy. Um, but for someone with his problems in his past, he is keeping himself composed remarkably well. Um,
Hmm.
he
Remarkably well, I would say.
Yeah, he knows eventually that they've got to get that shield away from John Walker. And Sam, because Sam still feels like he's not worthy, is like, okay, the shield's better off destroyed. Well, Bucky does not want to see that shield destroyed. That's, you know, the last piece of his friend he's got.
Pretty much. That's a good point. And I think, you know, to the other thing you said, Sam's just not ready to admit or accept. You know, he's not ready to accept that it might be necessary to take that away from Walker. Now, I do get where Bucky's coming from, as you just explained so well. But I think that you know, if you take a step back, you know, from Bucky's sort of a very personal attachment that he has, you know, even something closer to Sam's point of view, I don't think you can say yet from what they know that like this guy is dangerous in a way that like it just like you just have to deprive him of this shield thing, not just because he's not quite like living up to Cap's legacy, but like, you know, at that point, I don't think he's demonstrated himself as like being dangerous in a way to where Sam can mentally take that step of like, okay, we got to take it away from this guy, you know, regardless of any other factors. What do you think of that?
I hate to say Zemo has a good point because he's obviously the bad guy, or at least one of them. But when he talks about heroes and icons and how that, you know, one step leads to another step, leads to another step, leads to war, that's the kind of power Steve was wielding. People
Yeah,
rallied behind Steve. People went to war for Steve.
yeah,
That's the kind of power that's in John Walker's hands right now. Is
yeah,
that the guy
yeah.
you want wielding that power?
That is a good point. And you know, it's like Sam said in the episode about, you know, about the Trouble Man album. He's out of line, but he's not wrong. You know,
I
he's
think
out of
there's
line, but
several
he's right.
places throughout the episode that Zemo is out of line, but not wrong.
Hmm.
Just like when the three of them are talking, it's like somebody trying to interrupt an old married couple's argument.
They do
But
act like an old married couple.
Bucky and Sam are fighting, and Zemo tries to butt in, and they're both like, no. Like, simultaneously, like, together. They're a united front against Zemo. No, Zemo, shut up. We're having this argument.
I love it. And he's just like,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I really do enjoy their sort of like developing relationship and sort of the bickering of it. And there was, by the way, there was this great moment when Zemo comes out with that old sports car, and they get in, and Sam's in the back, and he and he goes, "You're not going to move the seat up, are you?" And go to Bucky, and it's like, no. And it's a total callback to that scene from Captain America Civil War when they're in that little Beetle with Steve, and they're watching him like get the gear from Sharon, and he's like, and the tables are turned around. So that's really good. But I think that their bickering is intensifying as things heat up for them. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it is interesting to see Zemo in the mix, with them. But, back to Bucky, I think he's having a really hard time with this. I mean, not that he would show it, and he's obviously able to hold himself together, but I think he's approaching a point. In the show where, he's really going to have to. He's either going to break or he's going to break or he's going to bend. He's going to hold it together or he's going to not. Like, there's going to be a moment of crisis for him, I guess is what I'm saying. What do you think about an oncoming moment of crisis for him? Do you think that that's coming, or like what do you think is about that?
In a lot of ways, I think that bar fight was a moment of crisis for him. Well, what's rule 2? Don't hurt people. He had to hurt half that bar. Like that, you kick somebody halfway across the room, it doesn't feel good. So to hold cover, he had to do a lot of things that he doesn't want to do anymore. But
yeah, I mean, down to
he's
the point
not doing it because he lost control of himself. He's doing it with conscious forethought for the greater good. And I think that's where he will learn to bend instead of break under this weight.
Yeah. Well, I think that is good, and I think you're right about that, although he really is disregarding a lot of those rules from his therapist, isn't he? Don't do anything illegal. Although technically he didn't break Zemo out, right? He just went to visit him and basically gave him a rendezvous point once he got himself out. Am I missing something? I don't recall seeing him actually do anything to directly help Zemo.
They cut away. They talk, hey, what book are you reading? And then it cuts to, boom, there's a key card in the book.
Yeah, but Zemo already had that. He like showed it to Bucky, right?
Yeah, but why would Bucky be interested in a book that suddenly magically had the key in it if he wasn't responsible for the key being in the book?
But Zemo was in his cell, like behind the plexiglass or whatever. So he already had that before Bucky even came. So I feel like Zemo was biding his time for the perfect moment. And when Bucky shows up and says, hey, there's more super soldiers, you want to come help get rid of them? And Zemo's like, yeah, of course I do. Oh, by the way, I have a way out of here if you just want to tell me where to rendezvous with you. Maybe I'm forgetting something from the episode.
That's not the impression I got, but who knows? I mean, it looks like they intentionally cut it to put a question mark there.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, maybe, but...
Because I don't think Zemo's the kind of guy who would have that key sitting there this whole time and not tried to use it by now.
That's possible. I mean,
if his stash house was walking distance from the prison.
Yeah.
This whole time.
Maybe Bucky swiped it on the way in, but they didn't show him do that, and they showed Zemo having the key card already and then just showing it to Bucky. So that's why I think... I mean, they just showed Bucky like walking out after that, Yeah,
but if Bucky didn't know the key was in there, why mention the book at all?
Well, he did know the key was in there. Wait a minute. Bucky asked him about the book?
Yeah, they're talking, and then it seems almost abruptly, Bucky changes direction, and it's like, what book are you reading?
Interesting. Yeah, well, I'll have to go back and revisit that. But yeah, I mean, I think Bucky is on a real journey here, and I'm really looking forward to seeing, how that all comes together. And frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if Bucky is the one to take away the shield from Walker ultimately in the scene where whatever happens. Because I feel like, as we mentioned in our John Walker segment, like something's gonna come to a head, and Walker is not going to behave admirably.
And I would
And
predict it happens this next episode.
I think you're probably right that it'll happen towards the end of next episode, because that'll be episode 4, and then there's only 2 episodes left,
Right.
right? Because we're gonna have, so then like the 5th episode, I will assume that Sam will have the shield and he'll be training with it, like we saw in a couple of those trailers,
Because you got to have a montage.
right? And then the 6th episode will just be where everything comes to a head, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're probably right about that. But let's place a bet. What do you think are the chances that Bucky's the one who actually gets to take it away? Because I feel like that would be a very satisfying character moment for him.
I think it could potentially be satisfying for both of them, just for different reasons.
That's true. That's true.
Sam finally, being like, okay, I am worthy for the shield. I'm taking it from you, to put his foot down and declare himself as worthy. I think that would be a good character point for him. And also Bucky, it could be a good character point for him to, I'm rescuing this last piece of my friend from you,
Yeah.
idiot.
I think that if it's not a situation where Walker just gets like taken out, like I don't think he's going to be killed, but like say a flag smasher like knocks him unconscious or something, and then they just pick it up from there. If it's not something like that where they like actively take it away from him, I could see both Bucky and Sam, confronting him and fighting him for it. But then I feel like maybe the most satisfying way it could go down, at least for me, would be if Bucky is the one to physically pull it out of his hand and then he like hands it to Sam.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that would probably be the most satisfying thing.
Well, yeah, either John Walker is going to get disabled in some way, or they're going to take it from him. I don't see John Walker suddenly having this crisis of conscience, seeing the light and handing it over willingly.
Yeah, I don't see that happening unless it's that 10 to 25% chance that he surprises us by being like a decent dude, right? So I guess we're going to have to find that out. But again, I feel like if Sam is going to keep the shield, then it, like we talked about before, there has to be an element of like public approval for it, to where the government's not just going to like come after him and be like, give it to us or we're going to arrest you again.
Well, I think after Sam takes the shield and then saves the day again, that it is going to be enough public support that what are the politicians going to do?
I think that there's a possibility that it goes down in a very specific way that I'm going to save for our predictions. So why don't we move on to our next topic? So I want to talk about, let's see, we have talked about John Walker and we have talked about Bucky. So let's talk about the Flag Smashers, shall we? The commercial for the Global Repatriation Council at the beginning of episode 3 of Falcon and the Winter Soldier sure puts a warm and fuzzy spin on the reintegration of half the population that returned from the blip. But we find out that tons of people live in their resettlement camps that seem to be chronically low on basics like food and water. These conditions seem to be what has, at least in part, radicalized art teacher wannabe turned super terrorist Carly Morgenthau, given what she says to her flag smasher buddy about using all their super strength to get supplies to the kids in those camps. Beyond that, they're expecting a job offer from Power Broker, which can't be good for anyone. And from the way they ended the episode, it looks like they've crossed the line into full-blown mass murder mode. So what do you make of all this, Bob? Carly and her super smashers clearly need to be stopped, but is the GRC dropping the ball here too? What are your impressions of Carly and her gang after this?
I think the GRC is definitely dropping the ball here. They go to the old woman who's maybe Carly's mother or someone she looked up to, who's dying of, what did they say, tuberculosis. And one doctor's like, yeah, in those kind of crowded camps, that sort of happens all the time. Um, and Carly mentions, when people came back, we were somewhere, and then the people who came back, they booted us out and took their place back. So, we went from over the last 5 years having somewhere to now these people have come back and uprooted our lives. Now, that may be fair for the person who came back, but for the person being displaced,
It's also
that's got to be the kind of thing that sort of radicalizes you.
Well, yeah, and then you're forced to live in these camps, and you don't have
Right.
enough food and water and all this, and so I actually get the impression that these GRC camps are a little bit more complex than I originally envisioned, because you have to imagine that some people who come back would have still the resources or the connections or whatever to like get their old old situation back, their old house, whatever.
Right.
Whereas other people, don't. And so you have a mix of blipped people and non-blipped people that just got pushed out of where they were when other people came back. So it's really interesting, complicated, sort of nasty situation. And just one clarification, I think that when she talked about her mom dying of tuberculosis or whoever that was something that happened previously, and the person who was dying during this episode that she like went to go visit and all that was the person who got shot in the previous episode, on like when Walker shot her in their fight on top of the semi trucks, because she got shot in the gut. And as we saw from Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Steve being a super soldier does not make him immune to bullet wounds. I mean, he's not Thor,
Yeah, bullet wounds still hurt.
So I think that's what happened. So by my count, I think they've lost like 2 of the super flag smashers, because there was the guy that decided to stay behind and delay the police or whatever in the previous episode, and then there's the one that got shot and died. And there's supposedly 20 doses, Dr. Nagel said, right? Total.
There's 20 doses, but did they use them all? Because originally they only counted 8 super soldiers.
Oh, good point.
So, I mean, that's kind of the leverage they have. Like, they have, what would it be, 12 doses of super soldier serum left? That's what
About
they're
a dozen.
expecting to have leverage with the power broker.
Yeah.
But the power broker does not seem to me, from the reputation they're giving him, that he's going to be the fuzzy kumbaya, let's work it out kind of guy.
I don't think
He's going to want to kill
at
them all. Like, oh, you crossed me, I'm going to kill all of you and take my stuff back. So I don't think they have the leverage they think they have.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think they have it at all. Well, I mean, they have some, but the power broker being, a crime like Uberlord is not going to be cool with that. And, those type of folks don't tend to want to make compromises with people that F them over, right?
Yeah.
So she's saying the power broker is going to come to them, not necessarily like on their knees, but like come to them, wanting to bargain maybe. Whereas I think, and who was it that said, that they feel sorry for Carly because of what she did to the power broker? Was that, I can't remember who that was actually. Was it one of the people that they made contact with in the fancy criminal bar? But yeah, I tend to think that Carly and them are in trouble. But it's also a little more interesting conflict than just having like one super evil villain, laughing maniacally because they want to rule the world versus, the knights on shining armor. It's like a much more interesting situation than that, with, even the villains, maybe having it out for each other. So that's really interesting.
And even multiple levels within the Flag Smashers, because Carly, seemingly on her own initiative, blows up that building with people in it. And even her teammates like, dude,
did we want to go there? Yeah.
Are you sure that's a good idea? Because it's one thing to steal supplies that are desperately needed. I mean, you can get some sort of worldwide sympathy for that. Mm-hmm. But when you steal the supplies and then blow up a building full of people you've already subdued,
yeah,
just to make a point, uh, you're
Yeah,
going to have less support after that.
I mean, I think Carly's, flag smashers or super smashers are they're an example of a villain where you can empathize with their plight, the ways in which they've either, been wronged or made a victim, or the dire straits that they've have found themselves in. But the way they go about resolving that is not good. That
Yeah.
is, again, that is what makes them the villain. And now they've crossed this line and they're just straight up murdering people. She does have that line where it's like, don't you understand? We're fighting for our survival. And like, okay, you can understand that, but at the same time, like, you really didn't have to blow them up. Now, she says to her friend, this is the only language they understand. That I think is her falling into the more simplistic way of thinking. Like, you can get where somebody is, you can get where she's coming from, I think, but at the same time, A, that's really bad and morally reprehensible what she's done. And B, to say that's the only language they understand, in a way, maybe that's true, but that doesn't mean that, like, it's going to have the effect that you want it to have, the fact that you, like, killed, like, all these guards or whatever. So I think she's just created more problems for herself, and obviously she should not have killed those people, right? So
Yeah, there's definitely some more problems than she anticipates are coming down the road for her at this point.
yeah. But I think it does make more sense that they did not use all of the super soldier serum that they got. Because A, that does give them more leverage with the power broker, and B, it also holds out various possibilities for not only the future of the show, but the future of the MCU, right? Because you can imagine them being a very limited quantity forever, essentially. Like, somebody's going to be interested in those, right? So who knows what's going to happen? I think that whatever happens the rest of the show, I would not be surprised if at least one or two of those vials survives the end of this show and is just, like, out there in the MCU to cause problems. You know what I mean? So so that's how I feel about that. All right, do you have any more comments about Flag Smashers, Bob, or are you ready to move on?
Let's move on.
Okay, let's talk about Sharon Carter. Okay, so what's going on with Sharon anyway? Apparently she's been on the lam since Captain America Civil War. Personally, I thought she had managed to hide her involvement in stealing Steve and Sam's gear, but I guess that one smooch made blowing up her life worthwhile. I'm being a little snarky here, but she seems to have become quite a bit more cynical during her years leading a life of crime. And her initial warning for Sam and Bucky to stay out of this, combined with later telling her driver they have several big problems, makes me think there's something else going on with her that we're not necessarily going to like. Still, she put herself in harm's way repeatedly to help Sam and Bucky, and she took down like a dozen hardcore bounty hunters to protect them. So, what do you think, Bob? How much has Sharon really changed? Is she just a black market art dealer hoping her Avenger buddies can get her a pardon for helping the old Captain America? Or is she operating under a more nefarious agenda? What are your thoughts on this?
You could have arguments both way on that. I think she is still a true believer of the good and the true. Because like you said, she single-handedly fights off like a dozen or more bounty hunters coming, while the guys are in just sort of casually having a conversation with the scientist. She's like, hey guys, speed it up. Hey guys, we got problems. Come on. Hey, let's speed it up. And they're just sort of very casually this drawn out conversation with the scientist until, the lab explodes. But, that those things happen. But so, I mean, to persevere through that fight scene solo, to have their back instead of just being like, hey, I told you 10 times we got problems, you're on your own now. How nefarious can she really be to have that kind of steadfast loyalty to her friends in a problem?
I think she has loyalty. I think there's still sort of a loyalty of Steve thing going on because those are his friends. I think she still values the good and the right, but I think that she's become a lot more cynical Because remember, she says when she's having that conversation at her place when like like Sam's changing clothes or whatever out of his pimp clothing, uh, that that she says, it's all bullshit, right? The blah blah blah, I can't remember her exact words, stars and stripes, all that, like whatever she says, and then she talks about the hypocrisy, So I think that she has been, scarred by everything that's went down. She has been forced to like lead the life of a criminal in a place where they won't extradite her to the United States, and she's obviously had to deal with, being in that kind of a world. And it feels like she also lived through the blip. So, I don't think we can underestimate the psychological effect that it would have had on her to be not only a fugitive for helping Steve, but then to live through the aftermath of the snap where half the world is gone. And there's like, there's a lot of grief and despair and all kinds of crap, going on during that time as well. So I feel like she is a character who's definitely changed. And I don't know, I wouldn't call her a nefarious character. At least I don't think so. But I think that she feels like she has to operate in a cynical, in a more cynical way now, unlike the way that she might prefer to. Does that make sense, or do you disagree?
I have two polar opposite theories.
Okay.
They're mutually exclusive, but I think they would both be kind of fun to explore.
Okay.
One, she's really gone down the rabbit hole, and she is either connected to or has taken over from Dread Pirate Roberts style, the Power Broker. Or she's deep undercover trying to take the Power Broker down. Just like the boys were undercover in the bar.
Interesting. I guess either of those could be true, Either of those could totally be true. I had been actually thinking that she might actually be the Power Broker. Or actually in the comics, the Power Broker is like two people, I believe, a man and a woman. So maybe she's like half of the Power Broker, possibly, but still hoping for a pardon and like not wanting to not help her friends, right? So that's interesting. And maybe she thought that and if she is working for the Power Broker or the Power Broker herself or like half the Power Broker, there's a possibility that she also was helping Sam and Bucky because she thought maybe they could lead her to the super soldier serum, which the Power Broker has been trying to get.
And that's the thing. Now that the Flag Smashers have caused all this drama and people are starting to realize that super soldier serum's out there, it's no longer a secret. It's become a liability. So maybe if she is either the Power Broker or working for the Power Broker, she, the decision has been made, this stuff is way more trouble than it's worth. Get rid of it. And if that's one of the big problems we've got, well, you see where that could go.
That could be many big problems. Okay, well,
because you don't see like because those bounty hunters on the island run by the Power Broker would not blow up the Power Broker's stuff without the Power Broker's permission. You think? Because he just doesn't seem like the person to cross.
Yeah,
even if there is a bounty on their heads.
Yeah, although who blew up the Power Broker, or who blew up the lab stuff? That was Zemo, right?
No, Zemo was in the lab.
Well, he shot the guy, and then after they were out of the lab,
he shot the guy, and then the missile came in like 10 seconds later.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
So he couldn't shoot the guy, run out, get the missile, fire the missile, in 10 seconds. It wasn't Zemo who fired it. It looked like one of the ruffian.
That's a good point. Zemo made another explosion happen. So
the other explosion was Zemo, not this one.
Well, that I think sums up our thoughts on Sharon Carter. So let's move on to our next topic, and we just have just this one more main topic before we talk really briefly about some predictions. So let's talk about Zemo, basically. Um, so Zemo is just obscenely wealthy with his private jets and pilot butlers, and he acts pretty much the way you'd expect: cool, collected, calculating, and obsessed with wiping the super soldier program from the face of the earth, as evidenced by his summary execution of Dr. Nagel. Now, I think what makes things more interesting is the appearance of Ao, played by Florence Kasumba, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced either of those names, at the end of the episode. Now, Bucky follows some Wakanda tech breadcrumbs until he turns a corner to find her standing there looking as imposing as ever. And if you need a reminder, we first saw her get all up in Natasha's face during Captain America Civil War. And now she's there for Zemo. Remember, Zemo is responsible for killing the previous king of Wakanda. It makes sense that they would send someone to hunt him down once he's escaped. I have a feeling they'll recruit Ao for their mission, with the understanding that she gets Zemo afterward, of course. And let's face it, they're going to need her when they finally face off against however many Super Smashers are left. So, maybe like half a dozen or so at the least, right? So what do you think, Bob? How did that final moment of the episode hit you? Were you surprised? And what do you expect now that Ao is on the show?
I think in that moment when they reveal it's her, my literal out loud response was, "Yay! Uh-oh."
Mm-hmm.
And that energy is what she's going to bring into the show. She will viscerally want to deliver Zemo's head on a platter back to Wakanda. And she may or may not care about the overarching agenda of the rest of the world to do it.
Yeah, she definitely is laying another. She's definitely putting another layer of tension into the mix, right?
Yeah.
And Sam and Bucky are not gonna want to give up Zemo's as a resource, right?
Certainly not right now, no.
Right. And so, I wouldn't be surprised if there's some like little scuffle or something between them. But I think at the end of the day, like she is badass, dude. But Bucky is enhanced, and Sam is there too. And I don't think that she'll be able to physically overpower them. Now, she might be able to sneak in a quick kill, but I don't know. I don't know whether her priority is to bring him back alive or to bring him back dead or alive. You know what I mean? So plus the other thing that could happen is like, they could be arguing about it when like they get ambushed or something like that. But I just have a feeling that, now that she's here, she's going to be along for the rest of the ride, or at least, a significant portion of the rest of the ride. But because, does it make sense to you that she shows up and they argue and then she's like, all right, I'm taking Zemo back. And then that's what happens. Like, is that really what's going to happen?
I don't think it's going to be as simple as that. Like, I don't think she's going to say, all right, Zemo's coming with me. And they're going to be like, sure, why not? I can almost envision sort of a Three Stooges fight between her, Sam, and Bucky, and Zemo taking advantage of the confusion and taking off, and then they have to spend half the episode chasing him back down. And then while they're chasing him down, they have the opportunity to talk and be like, look, we know this guy's a putz. We know you want to take him back for killing your king. We're all cool with that, but we need him first. Let's get this job done, and then you can take home what's left.
Yeah, I think that's probably the way it's likely to go down, although depending on the situation, I think Zemo is cool and calm and smart enough to know that if he doesn't have like the plane on the tarmac ready to go, like you know what I mean, that there's no way he's going to be able to get away from these people.
I don't think with Ao having access to Wakanda tech, even in that private jet, Zemo's got a chance.
Exactly. So I think he's probably more the type of character who's going to bide his time and wait for the perfect moment, as he did with Dr. Nagel and executing him, because he waited until there was like a surprise. I think it was the moment when like Sharon came in,
Yeah, Sharon
right?
walked in. Everyone looks at her, and while they're looking that way, he's shooting that way.
Mm-hmm. And even though Sam said you'd try something like that again, I'm gonna kill you. He was like, wouldn't dream of it.
Of
But I don't
course,
believe him for 1 second.
which you can see the subtext at the bottom of the screen. He's definitely going to do that again.
Yes, yeah. Translation. I'm definitely going to do something like that again. So, but I'm really happy that Ao is in the show now. Like, I don't know how much she's going to be in it, but she's just been kind of a really cool tertiary, supporting character up to this point. And
Well,
so,
that's the thing. For a lot of times, Falcon was a cool supporting tertiary character, and then became,
yeah.
big hero.
Well, now he's got his own show too.
So what
you know,
I would love to see that Wakandan Special Forces group that she's a part of get their own show. I think that would be awesome.
Oh, that would be awesome, dude. That'd be cool. I'd tune in for that.
Absolutely, all day long.
But I like that they're using these Disney Plus shows to flesh out these other characters more. And there has been a little bit of a vacuum in the MCU since Endgame. Cap retired, Tony's dead, this and that and the other. People are not really with it anymore. But yeah, so I think it's going to be cool. I'm looking forward to see what happens with her. I just have a feeling she's going to sort of join up, she's going to be there to kind of give them grief and, add some tension. And then like, it'll be a situation where she gets roped into, whatever the big conflict is.
Well, yeah. And to be fair, Bucky and Sam are giving each other grief still. So, I mean, there's plenty of it to go around.
Oh, plenty. Absolutely. So, and I look forward to it. I
Absolutely.
I really do. In fact, I would dare say that I'm going to get some chuckles out of whatever the first like group scene with all of them is going to be, because you have Sam and Bucky sort of being like the bickering brothers, and now you have her, and it's like they don't really like Zemo, and they like really wouldn't mind if she happened to take him back to prison or like stab him or something, but at the same time they need him. So
well, yeah, Sam and Bucky are kind of like the odd couple with explosions. So
the odd couple with explosions. I love it. Okay, that's we got to remember that quote. All right. So let's move on. Let's just talk really quickly about the theories that we have, and I'll start because I just have a couple. I have a couple main ones. So I think that. Again, John Walker as the new Captain America is just such this like maybe polarizing figure. I mean, maybe there are MCU fans that really love him so far, but I think that part of the point of presenting him the way that they have has been to contrast with Steve and to make us want to punch him in the face. Which is why I give him like at least a 20% chance of like having this moment where he seems to be like a decent guy and makes us not want to punch him in the face as much, even though it is a low chance. But I think that there is a decent possibility that he actually gets his hands on one of these serums of super juice that the Flag Smashers have once he follows Sam and Bucky to find them, whenever they eventually find him, basically, right? And then he's going to take it, and he's gonna freak out. He's gonna do the wrong thing, and then they have to stop him. So I think there's that possibility. I also think so. When we were talking about John Walker before, here's the thing. Here's the prediction that I was thinking of. What if, because this guy in some ways, I mean, he is a really great soldier. I mean, you got to give him that. Like he's tough, but he's not super juiced. He's not super powered. He's not enhanced with the super soldier serum. So I can foresee a situation where action scene where they're facing off against the Flag Smashers, maybe he blunders in and kind of ruins like the setup that Sam and Bucky have, like whatever it is. But like, what if they like break his neck or something? They just kick him across the room and he breaks his back and he's paralyzed. And so that's when, Sam and Bucky take the shield to finish the fight or whatever happens. Maybe it gets caught on like, the local news station from their helicopter or like whatever. And that's how he ends up with like public support. But like, what if he basically becomes disabled as a result of being a little too big for his britches and trying to take on these super soldiers unwisely, right? Like, what if that happens? And then as a result, he either gets some super soldier serum that gets recovered, or remember, it's been a long time, Bob, but remember the Incredible Hulk and what they did to Tim Roth's character, where they juiced him up, and then they juiced him up again and again and again until he overdid it at the scientist's place and turned into the Abomination. But like, they still have that stuff, and that was also an outgrowth of the Captain America Super Soldier program, and with Bruce Banner's science sort of in there, right? And so what if they decide to juice him up with that, and that contributes to him becoming even more unstable, right? But by that time, he doesn't even have the shield anymore, so maybe that's when they dub him U.S. Agent, which is, I think, the moniker that he ends up going by in the comics, like, especially if he doesn't have the shield anymore, right?
Right.
So I'm just thinking, I mean, it certainly would be simpler if he confronts the Flag Smashers and finds their stash or whatever, and then like injects himself. But what if it's a little bit more complicated than that, like where he gets disabled, that's how they get the shield, and then they bring him back and they juice him up with this other stuff that like really is going to make him even more unstable? Because I feel like there might be more dramatic weight to that, because they've already demonstrated him going into a narcissistic rage out, right?
Well, yeah, and they showed him sort of fly off the handle and be sort of impulsive. So you almost see him like he's getting whooped, and then looks over and sees the tube there and is like, oh, okay, grabs it and hits himself with it.
I mean, I could see that, but I could also see it being a little more interesting if they give him this other serum that they had given Tim Roth's character way back in The Incredible Hulk, which begs the question even more of, is he unstable? Right.
I think after what happened there, like if he knew that what was happened, and he took it anyway, then he's definitely unstable. Like, well, I mean, he took some and turned into that. I mean,
if he does end up being like disabled in the fight, like his back breaks or he's paralyzed or something, and like they don't have any of the serum for whatever reason, then I see him agreeing to the juice that they injected in Tim Roth in a heartbeat. In
that situation, I see him agreeing to whatever they've got.
Yeah, exactly. And it could also be a thing where like they fought these super smashers and it didn't turn out all that well. And so they're like, well, we need you back in the field, but this time juiced up, and maybe we're going to juice up somebody else too or something. So I could see something like that happening. Like, what do you think the chances are for something like that versus just he sees the vial and he injects himself?
It depends on how late in the game they wait for that transition to happen. One is very straightforward, can happen in a few seconds. The other would take some development time to brew. So if he was defeated like at the beginning of the next episode, then I'd say they'd have time to work in those plot elements.
Well, if it happens at any point during the next episode, episode 4,
right,
then in episode 5 could be the episode where he gets the serum, recovers, gets his new outfit or whatever back on. And then in the 6th episode, where we're surely going to have our climactic battle between the good guys and the bad guys.
Or he just gets taken out. And then at the very end of the 6th episode, sort of like a post-credit screen, it's like, we have something maybe for you to try, and they leave it hanging there to make him a thorn in someone's side for an upcoming thing.
That could very well be too. That I could easily see that.
Because there always has to be some drama spillover to the next thing.
Yeah, and I can almost guarantee that they're going to have a post-credit scene after the very last episode of the show. I mean, they did it with WandaVision. Too,
yeah.
And that's the MCU thing to do, right? So, so that could very well be the post-credit scene for the show. In fact, that would not surprise me whatsoever. But I kind of feel like he's going to be I don't know. Maybe he won't be a factor in the final battle, because ultimately I think the story's more about, Sam and Bucky.
Well, they are the title characters.
They are indeed the title characters.
We're going pretty far down the rabbit hole for when they call the show Falcon and the Winter Soldier. It's going to in the end be about them.
In the end, it will be about the people whose names are in the title.
Yes.
So, okay. So, other predictions. What are your other predictions, Bob?
Other than the two opposing predictions about Sharon, those were the biggest predictions I had after watching this episode.
So the predictions about Sharon, just to review, because we talked about it a little bit in our Sharon segment, but basically, you were saying that you foresee two really interesting possibilities, right? On one hand, maybe Sharon is actually undercover for the CIA or SWORD or SHIELD or something like that, and she's trying to get to the power broker. On the other hand, maybe she's actually either working for the power broker, or maybe even the power broker herself.
Right.
What did you call it? Captain Robert style, like she.
Yeah. The Dread Pirate Roberts from The Princess Bride, where right. it's a moniker handed down from person to person, that it hasn't been the same Dread Pirate Roberts this whole time. Like one person gets sick of doing it, retires, and hands it down to the next person.
Or she ended up killing the power broker and decided just to take it on. Or I also raised the possibility that, in the comics, I believe the power broker is two people, a man and a woman. Maybe they're brother and sister or something. I'm not familiar with those comics, but maybe she's half of the power broker, right? Maybe
that could be.
Maybe she's one of the two people that constitutes power broker.
Either way, I think her story will be some kind of extreme. They leave too much of a big question mark hanging in the air with, we got a problem, I'll tell you in the car. We got a couple of problems, actually. That
means something.
It means something. And she's very invested. And like you said, she was probably the sniper who saved him.
No, she was definitely the sniper who saved them.
That being the case, she was invested since before it was obvious they needed help. She was following them and keeping an eye on the situation before Sam's phone call made it all go to a sharp left-hand turn.
And if she was connected to the power broker in some way, whether she's looking into the power broker or working with or for or as the power broker, she would know that these guys are coming to, meet somebody who's like a minion of the power broker.
Yeah.
Right. So that all makes sense. She
has a big part to play.
I think we're definitely going to see Sharon again, and I think she's going to play an important role. I don't know how important. I guess it just kind of depends on whichever way that goes with her, right? So, but I think that at the end of the day, she's still an ally of Sam and Bucky. Now, that would be a huge twist if Sharon turns out to be the power broker and is like, sorry, guys, I'm going to have to be bad now and send my minions after you, or, whatever happens.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but that would be interesting. Now, my other, do you have any other predictions you wanted to share, or was that the big one?
That was it.
I think just on sort of a more micro scale, like smaller, scale prediction, I think, as we may have mentioned, I think by the end of episode 4, Sam's going to have the shield, right? Because then that gives him episode 5 to sort of have a couple scenes with it and talk to Bucky about it, like we saw in the trailers, and practice with it. And then episode 6, he's ready to use it, right? So, look, I mean, there's only 6 episodes of this show. So how much time do they have to futz around with him not having the shield, right?
Yeah, that's a plot element I think I've got to get too soon.
Yeah, but I would be surprised if it's the first thing that happens in the episode. I see it more as happening towards the very end of the episode, after, there's some type of conflict and action scene to where they end up taking it away from Walker, right? In all the ways that we explained, we think it might happen.
I kind of see that as how they top off the episode, maybe end of the next episode. That's how they end it.
I don't know if it would be like the epilogue, but I feel like it would be sort of at the end of whatever the fight is, and then you have kind of like, an epilogue to the scene, or just like a final scene where you have kind of a resolution to things, and they get to talk, or they introduce the next, cliffhanger. But I think it will be towards the end of the next episode. You're in agreement with me there?
Yeah.
What percentage chance do you give that of happening?
It has to be like 90% at the end of this coming episode.
Yeah, I think it's like, I'm going to say like 95%. Because I think that for the audience, for us as fans, like, it's going to be really satisfying to watch him have it and use it, right? Mm-hmm. Now, that's not to say that his whole ambivalence toward it is going to be resolved. I think that he's not going to work through that until the end of the show, if then, right? Like, I think the show might still end with, he might have a greater level of acceptance, but I think it's still going to be something that he struggles with on some level by the end of the show, right? So that's how I feel about that. So honestly, though, those are the main predictions that I have. I think, that I predict that it's more likely that they're going to forcibly take the shield away from Walker, or that Walker's not giving it up willingly. And if the closest to willingly giving it up that he's going to get is if, like, he gets, like, taken out of the fight in some way, and he's, like, unconscious or literally disabled or maimed or, like, something like that, right? That's the closest he's going to get to literally giving it up willingly, in the sense that he'll either be unconscious.
Well, yeah, that's not close at all. Him getting his butt whooped and being out of it isn't willing at all.
Right. But that's the closest to it that I think he's going to get, basically, So there we have it. I think that's it for today, Bob. Did you have any other comments?
That's it for me.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening to and or watching Mecha Dragon. Please click like down below and tell us what you think. Are we off on what we're making for these predictions? Do you feel differently about John Walker than what we've described? Do you have a different take on Bucky and Zemo and everything that's going on? Let us know in the comments. And if you're listening to our audio podcast, hit us up on Twitter at Mecha Dragon Show. It's also at Mecha Dragon Show on Instagram, and you can find us on Facebook at Mecha Dragon Show, and it's mechadragonshow@gmail.com if you'd like to send us a message with questions, comments, corrections, or your ideas for the next episode of Mecha Dragon. So thanks everybody once again, and until next time, take care.